What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to another gun guide. This is the series where I go into great detail with all of the stats, as well as best attachment combinations for every gun in Modern Warfare. In today's episode, by popular request, we're going to be moving on to the Oden. And first up, as always, let's have a look at the damage profile. The base damage profile on the Oden is 48-36, which means it's always going to be a 3-shot kill. However, we do have an upper torso multiplier of 1.29, which means if you are landing those chest shots, you get a damage profile of 62-46, and this means in the maximum damage range, you can get a 2-shot kill. As for headshots, we get a 1.6 times multiplier to the head, which means our headshot damage is 77-58. And basically with this, headshots really aren't necessary. You want to be aiming more for the upper torso because it's a bigger target, because headshots don't really have much of an extra benefit over those upper torso shots. Moving on to our rate of fire, this is very slow. It is the slowest in the assault rifle category at 435 rounds per minute, and this means it's not a very forgiving gun if you're missing shots. However, our minimum time to kill value in the 2-shot kill range, assuming you hit those torso shots, is 138 milliseconds, which is ridiculously fast. This is one of the fastest killing guns in the game without headshots. As for the 3-shot time to kill, this is 276 milliseconds, which is still somewhat competitive, but it does start to get a bit on the slow side. This brings us to ranges, and as you can see here, our 2-shot kill potential with those torso shots extends all the way out to just over 40 meters, which is an incredible 2-shot kill range. On a lot of the 6v6 maps in the game, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a practical line of sight beyond this range. As for the normal suppressors, the lightweight suppressor will reduce this range by 25%, so I absolutely would not recommend that, and the monolithic suppressor increases this by 7.5%. Now this gun does have a special suppressor, the Colossus suppressor, but I'm going to cover that later in the video when we look at unique attachments. But finally for ranges, having a look at hardcore, the Oden is always going to be a 1-shot kill in hardcore modes, unless you're shooting through some form of cover. As for hipfire, as you can see here, the Oden has pretty standard hipfire for the assault rifle category, which isn't terrible, although when you also consider the fact that this has such a slow fire rate, you generally don't want to be hipfiring because just one missed shot will often make the difference between life and death with this gun. Getting into idle sway, as you can see here, there really isn't a lot of idle sway. This is pretty standard for assault rifles, and therefore your first shot accuracy is generally going to be good with the Oden. As for recoil though, this is one of the big downsides with this gun. As you can see here, the recoil is generally straight upwards, although it does sway a little bit to the left over time. And it isn't like a straight up recoil pattern, so there is a little bit of side to side bounce, but not a lot. The main thing to pay attention to though is the gap between shots. It kicks upwards with each shot a decent amount, and especially at longer ranges when you're trying to hit that torso shot, this will absolutely throw you off target, and therefore it's definitely something you want to pay attention to with this gun. As for the next big downside with the Oden, this is the aim down sight time. This has the slowest aim down sight time in the assault rifle category at 367 milliseconds. And this means you pretty much have to treat the Oden like an LMG unless you're stacking a bunch of attachments to help with your aim down sight time. Fortunately though, our sprint out times are standard for the assault rifle category at 267 milliseconds for our normal sprint out and 400 milliseconds for our super sprint out time. Our magazine capacity isn't great with this gun at just 20 rounds with 40 in reserve, although at the same time with the super slow fire rate, it's not like you burn through this magazine like instantly. It does take a bit of time to get through it. As for our reload time, this is one of the slowest in the assault rifle category at 1.95 seconds, although if we use the sleight of hand weapon perk on this, that will cut it down to 1.13 seconds. So finally for base stats, our movement speed is 93%, which is a little bit on the slow side for assault rifles, but it's not that bad. And our aim down sight strafe speed is the slowest that I've calculated so far for the assault rifles at 42.5%. So this is definitely not a super mobile assault rifle by any means. And with that, like I said, that pretty much covers it for the base stats of the Oden. However, this gun has a decent number of unique attachments, so let's hop into those, and first up we'll cover the barrel attachments. Now the first barrel we have access to is the 810mm factory barrel, and with this one, this increases your damage range by 35%, which is a really nice increase, especially considering the base range is so big. This means the actual net increase to our range is pretty massive. And on top of that, this helps with bullet velocity, which is going to help you hit your targets at longer ranges, especially if they're moving, and it helps with recoil control, which is big for the Oden. Having a look at the recoil with this barrel equipped, You can definitely see that there is less overall recoil. However, it doesn't really affect those initial shots too much. There's still a pretty decent gap between those shots, and those are the ones that count the most. So it is helpful, but when you really take a close look at it, it might not be quite as helpful as you would think when it comes to recoil. As for the downsides of this barrel, our aim down sight time is slowed down by about 9%. It will now be 400 milliseconds, which is approaching LMG levels of aim down sight time. And our overall movement speed is decreased by about 3%. So again, that takes us right around the LMG territory with movement speed. So using this barrel practically turns the Oden into an LMG, and honestly, I personally don't think the upsides are worth the downsides with this particular barrel. As for the next barrel attachment, this one is the 730mm factory barrel, and with this one we get a 20% increase to our damage range, which is still a very solid boost considering we have that really long base range. And again, this helps with our bullet velocity and recoil control, which if we have a look at the recoil here, I'm not really seeing any real improvement with this barrel. Now, the wall tests are mainly just designed to see general trends. They're never perfectly accurate because there always is some randomness mixed in, but just having a look at this, there's still a pretty massive gap in those initial shots, and therefore I wouldn't rely on this barrel to be helping all that much with your overall recoil control. As for the downsides, once again, this slows down our aim down sight time, although not quite as much as the previous barrel. This is only about a 5% slowdown at 384 milliseconds, and our overall movement speed is decreased by just 1%. So those downsides are a lot less noticeable, and they may be worth that 20% boost to your range, but that's really up to you and how you want to design your class. Now moving on to the final barrel attachment for the Oden, this is the 420mm barrel. And with this one, this improves your aim down sight speed. You now get a 317 millisecond aim down sight speed, which is still a little on the slow side for assault rifles, but it's much more in line with some of the other ones. And this is a roughly 16% increase, so that's quite solid. Additionally, we get a very slight boost to our movement speed. This will improve your movement speed by roughly 1%. Now, these upsides do come at the cost of, first off, bullet velocity, which is going to make it a bit more difficult to hit moving targets at longer ranges. And on top of that, we lose some of that recoil control, and you can see here that it definitely has more recoil while using this particular barrel, and therefore I wouldn't use this barrel if you're planning on challenging people at longer ranges. And with that, that finally brings us into another unique attachment with the Oden, and this is the Colossus Suppressor. This is in the muzzle category, and with this you get that sound suppression, you get all the benefits of having a suppressor, and on top of that, your damage range is increased by 25%, which is a very solid increase. And we get added recoil control, which finally you can see there is actually a proper reduction to your recoil with this. There's still a bit of a gap in those initial shots, but this is the first attachment that really does seem to help a decent amount when it comes to that recoil. Now, unfortunately, we do get one pretty big downside to this, and this is your aim down sight speed is slowed down by roughly 12%, and it's now going to be 417 milliseconds, which is basically in line with the LMGs in this game. So a pretty massive slowdown to aim down sight time, but also some pretty good benefits with this. Additionally, your aim walking steadiness is reduced with this, so it's going to bounce around just a little bit more while strafing and aiming down sight. But honestly, I don't really see that as being that big of a deal for this. So overall, the Colossus does have some great benefits, and therefore with certain classes and certain playstyles, I would absolutely recommend it as long as you're aware of the fact that you really have to slow down your playstyle, or you have to stack other attachments to counteract that slower aim down sight speed. Now moving on to the final set of unique attachments, these are the extended mags. First up, we have the 25 round extended mag, which says that it reduces your aim down sight speed and also slows down your movement speed. When it comes to that aim down sight time, there is no change that I'm able to measure for the Oden, so you don't have to worry about that too much. However, our movement speed is slowed down by 1.5%. We see a really similar story with the 30 round mags. Once again, our aim down sight speed is unchanged as far as I'm able to measure at least, which is great news. However, our movement speed is slowed down by 3%, which, like I said earlier, that does take you down around the LMG territory for movement speed. So that's definitely something to consider when using this attachment. So that covers it for the unique attachments for the Oden, although there is one more thing that I want to mention that's really special about this gun, and this is the interaction with the stopping power field upgrade. This gun absolutely excels with this field upgrade because within that standard 2-shot kill range to the torso, if you hit an upper torso shot with stopping power rounds in your gun, you will be able to get a one-shot kill. So this thing is absolutely dominant once you get those stopping power rounds in there, and you can go around just one-tapping everybody in core game modes as long as you hit the upper torso. If you hit them in the arm or the stomach or something, it won't be a one-shot kill. So you do have to be precise, but if you are really rewarded heavily for this. But with that, it's finally time to move into some great attachment combinations for this gun, as well as some example class setups. And this first one is the way that I prefer running the Oden because I tend to like a more aggressive playstyle. And with this, we're maxing out on attachments that improve your aim down sight time. So first up, we have that 420mm barrel. We've got the TAC laser. We've also got the FTAC XL, which is the stock that's going to help with our aim down sight time. We've got the sleight of hand perk, and finally we have the stippled grip tape, which I did want to address something. A lot of people have been saying that Drifter said that the stippled grip does not help with your aim down sight time, and that hasn't been my experience at all with my testing. I have seen a very consistent 1 frame decrease to your aim down sight time with the stippled grip, so I personally do recommend using stippled grip on this gun. Now, for those of you that are curious, with this combination of attachments, you can get an aim down sight time of 250 milliseconds, which is now quite solid for an assault rifle. And therefore, you can be relatively aggressive with this gun. However, just keep in mind, it's not going to be very accurate, so you do want to stay up close and personal with this particular setup. Taking that into an example class setup, we've got a 1911 as our secondary. Our perks are going to be EOD, Hardline, as well as Tune-Up. And the reason we're using Tune-Up is I will also be combining this with stopping power most of the time, which allows me to get those one-shot kills to the upper torso. As for our lethal, this is a C4, and our tactical is a stim shot. This is an excellent setup if you're playing something like Shoot House or other smaller 6v6 maps, or even if you're playing Ground War and you just want to be really aggressive and sticking around the objectives, this can be quite effective for you. As for the next attachment combination, this one's designed more for longer range stealth play, and with this we are using that Colossus suppressor, which keeps us off the radar and also increases our range, which is great. I've got an operator reflex sight on there just because I prefer that style of sight if I'm going to be using a sight. For a lot of people, they like using the high zoom optics on this, and that's totally fine if that's how you want to run this. It just doesn't really work too well for me. Also, once again, for our stock, we have the FTAC XL, and this is going to help with our aim down sight time, which is definitely needed if you're using the Colossus suppressor, in my opinion. Same thing goes with the stippled grip tape. This is once again going to help counteract that reduction to your aim down sight time with the Colossus. And that just leaves us with our underbarrel attachment, which is the Merc foregrip, which is going to help us a little bit more with that recoil on top of the Colossus suppressor, so we can be a lot more precise at longer ranges. Taking that one into an example class setup, this one's designed for Ground War game modes, and with this we've got the Desert Eagle as our secondary, EOD for perk 1, Ghost for perk 2 because we have that suppressor to keep us off the radar, might as well stack that with Ghost, and finally we have Shrapnel, which allows us to have 2 of those thermites to deal with tanks and other vehicles in Ground War. As for our tactical, once again this is going to be a stim shot. This particular class setup is excellent for kind of sticking on the outskirts and picking people off at ranges. You can kind of treat it like a DMR. I like tap firing with this. I rarely go full auto unless an enemy gets up close and personal with me. And this often allows you to pick those people off and they have no idea what hit them. But with that, that's finally going to wrap it up for today's gun guide on the Oden. Personally, I think this gun is very powerful in the right hands. However, it is not a forgiving gun by any means. Also, it doesn't really excel for super aggressive playstyles, even though you can kind of set it up in a way that will be okay with aggression. It's not really designed for that sort of a playstyle, so for those players that like hanging back and they have really nice accurate shots, you're most likely going to love the Oden. But of course, that's just my opinion. I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about the Oden? Do you think it's a really solid gun, or do you not really like it so much? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you guys have missed any of the previous episodes of Gun Guides, I've now covered most of the assault rifles and SMGs. I will leave a link to the playlist down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.